8 signs your brain needs more omega-3. Most people assume that if their brain were struggling, they would simply feel tired. That single assumption might be the reason so many subtle warning signs go unnoticed for years. The truth is that a brain running low on one particular nutrient often speaks in a much quieter language, one made up of forgotten words, restless nights, and moods that seem to shift for no clear reason at all. This video is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace advice from a qualified healthcare professional. If anything you hear today feels familiar, the most valuable next step is always a conversation with your doctor. Omega-3 fatty acids are not just another item on a supplement shelf. They are structural building blocks of the brain itself, woven into the membranes of every neuron, shaping how information travels from one thought to the next. When levels run low, the brain does not simply slow down evenly across the board. Instead, it tends to show trouble in specific, recognizable ways, and by the end of this video, you will understand one sign in particular that researchers consider among the most telling of all, a sign that often shows up long before anyone thinks to connect it to nutrition. Before we get into the list, it helps to understand why this nutrient matters so much in the first place. Omega-3 fatty acids, especially a type called DHA, make up a significant portion of the fatty tissue in the human brain. Unlike many other nutrients the body can manufacture on its own, DHA and its partner EPA have to come primarily from diet, most commonly from fatty fish like salmon and sardines, or from certain plant sources that the body converts in smaller amounts. When intake falls short over time, the effects tend to surface gradually, which is exactly why they are so easy to miss. Consider Margaret, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher from Ohio. For months, she brushed off her occasional forgetfulness as simply part of getting older. It was only when her daughter noticed a pattern, small lapses that seemed to cluster together with low energy and a quieter mood, that Margaret decided to bring it up during a routine checkup. Her story is not unusual, and it is a helpful reminder that these signs rarely appear alone. They tend to show up as a cluster, each one adding a little more insight into what the brain may be trying to communicate. There's another piece of context worth understanding before we begin, and it has to do with how the body handles omega-3 fatty acids differently depending on age. As we get older, the efficiency with which the body converts and utilizes these fats can change, meaning that dietary needs don't necessarily stay flat throughout life. A pattern of eating that felt adequate at 40 may no longer meet the brain's needs at 65 or 70. This is one reason healthcare providers increasingly ask about diet and nutrition as part of routine checkups for older adults, especially when cognitive or mood-related concerns come up in conversation. It's also worth mentioning that omega-3 status is rarely something people think to ask about on their own. Standard blood work doesn't always include a fatty acid panel unless specifically requested, which means many people go years without ever having a clear picture of where they stand. That's part of why recognizing the signs themselves becomes so valuable. They can serve as a prompt, a reason to bring up the topic during your next appointment, rather than waiting for a lab test to raise the question first. With that foundation in place, let's walk through the 8 signs, one at a time, starting with one of the most commonly reported. Number 1, frequent forgetfulness and word-finding trouble. There is a particular kind of forgetfulness that feels different from simply misplacing your keys. It's the moment mid-sentence when a familiar word seems to vanish, or when you walk into a room with a clear purpose and that purpose slips away before you arrive. Occasional lapses like this happen to everyone, but when they become a regular occurrence, especially alongside other changes, they may be associated with lower omega-3 status. DHA plays a structural role in the hippocampus, the brain region most closely tied to forming and retrieving memories, and some research has explored how fatty acid levels correlate with performance on memory-related tasks in aging adults. This does not mean forgetting where you parked the car once in a while is cause for alarm. It means that a persistent pattern, one that feels new or is getting more frequent, may be worth mentioning to a healthcare provider who can help rule out other causes and consider whether nutrition is playing a role. What makes this particular sign tricky is how easily it gets dismissed. Family members often attribute it to stress or normal aging, and the person experiencing it may feel embarrassed to bring it up at all. But paying attention to these small, repeated lapses, rather than explaining each one away individually, is often the first step toward understanding what the brain might actually need. It also helps to notice the texture of the forgetfulness itself, since not all memory lapses point in the same direction. Forgetting an appointment entirely feels different from forgetting the word for appointment while trying to describe it. The second kind, difficulty retrieving specific words during normal conversation, is the pattern some researchers have looked at more closely in relation to fatty acid status, since word retrieval relies heavily on rapid communication between different brain regions. Keeping a mental note of when these moments happen and under what circumstances can give both you and your doctor a clearer starting point for a conversation. Number 2, persistent brain fog and difficulty concentrating. If forgetfulness is about losing pieces of information, brain fog is about losing the clarity needed to process information in the first place. People describe it in strikingly similar terms no matter where they live. A feeling of thinking through static, of needing to read the same paragraph 3 times before it sinks in, of losing a train of thought in the middle of a conversation. This kind of mental fatigue is not laziness, and it is not simply a sign of getting older. Omega-3 fatty acids support the fluidity of cell membranes throughout the brain, which in turn may influence how efficiently neurons communicate with one another. When that communication becomes less efficient, thinking itself can feel like wading through fog rather than walking on solid ground. Robert, a 71-year-old retired engineer, described it to his doctor as feeling like his brain had a permanent delay, like a video call with a lagging connection. He had always prided himself on sharp, quick thinking, so the change was noticeable to him almost immediately. After discussing his diet with his physician, he realized he had unintentionally cut back on fish over the past several years, favoring convenience over the meals he used to prepare more often. His experience illustrates something important. Brain fog rarely announces itself as a nutritional issue. It simply feels like the mind isn't working the way it used to, and only by looking closer do the pieces start to connect. What Robert's case also highlights is how gradual this kind of change tends to be. He couldn't point to a single week when things shifted. Instead, it was more like a slow dimming, the kind of change that's nearly impossible to notice day to day, but becomes unmistakable when you compare how you feel now to how you felt several years earlier. This is exactly why check-ins with a healthcare provider over time, rather than a single snapshot assessment, tend to be so valuable for catching these gradual shifts before they become more pronounced. Number 3, mood swings and unexplained irritability. The brain and mood are inseparable, and omega-3 fatty acids appear to play a meaningful role in that relationship. Several studies have examined the connection between fatty acid intake and mood regulation, and while the research is still evolving, there is a growing body of evidence suggesting that low omega-3 levels may be associated with increased irritability and mood instability in some individuals. This might look like snapping at a loved one over something minor, feeling emotionally raw without an obvious trigger, or noticing that your patience seems to run out faster than it used to. It's worth being clear here that mood changes have many possible causes, ranging from sleep quality to stress to underlying health conditions, and omega-3 status is just one piece of a much larger picture. Still, for someone noticing unexplained shifts in temperament, especially alongside some of the other signs on this list, it may be worth discussing dietary patterns with a healthcare provider as part of a broader conversation about well-being. One detail that researchers have found particularly interesting is the possible link between omega-3 fatty acids and inflammation in the brain. Chronic low-grade inflammation has been studied in relation to mood regulation for years now, and some fatty acids appear to play a role in either promoting or calming that inflammatory response, depending on the balance of fats in someone's overall diet. This doesn't mean irritability is always, or even usually, about inflammation. It simply means the relationship between what we eat and how we feel emotionally is more biologically grounded than many people assume, and that's worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as just a bad mood. Number 4, a rising sense of anxiety or feeling on edge. Closely related to mood, but distinct enough to mention on its own, is a heightened baseline of anxiety. This isn't necessarily about panic attacks or diagnosable anxiety disorders. It's often described more simply as a background hum of unease that wasn't there before, a tendency to feel on edge in situations that never used to bother you. Some research has pointed to a possible relationship between omega-3 intake and the body's stress response system, including how certain inflammatory pathways in the brain behave under chronic stress. Diane, a 64-year-old grandmother from Arizona, noticed this shift after a particularly demanding year caring for a family member. She assumed the anxiety was purely situational, tied entirely to the stress of caregiving, and in many ways it was. But her doctor pointed out that during that same period, her meals had become rushed and repetitive, often skipping the kinds of foods she used to prioritize. Addressing both the emotional load she was carrying and the nutritional gaps in her diet became part of her broader plan for feeling more like herself again. Her story is a good reminder that these signs don't exist in isolation from the rest of life. They interact with stress, sleep, and circumstance in ways that are rarely simple to untangle. Diane's situation also points to something many caregivers experience without realizing it. When life gets demanding, nutrition is often the first thing to slip, not because people don't care about their health, but because there simply isn't time or energy left to prioritize it. It's a quiet irony that the exact moments when the brain needs the most support are often the moments when we're least equipped to give it that support. Recognizing this pattern in yourself or in someone you love who's going through a difficult stretch can be an important step toward breaking the cycle before it deepens. Number 5, restless or poor quality sleep. Sleep is often the first thing to suffer when something in the body is out of balance, and the brain's fatty acid status appears to be no exception. Some studies have suggested a relationship between omega-3 levels and sleep quality, including how long it takes to fall asleep and how restorative that sleep feels the next morning. This might show up as lying awake with a mind that won't quiet down, waking frequently throughout the night, or getting a full 8 hours and still feeling unrested. It's easy to blame poor sleep on stress, screen time, or simply getting older, and those factors absolutely play a role. But when someone has ruled out the usual culprits and still finds their sleep quality lacking, it may be worth considering the broader picture of brain health, including nutritional factors like omega-3 intake. A conversation with a healthcare provider can help determine whether this is one thread worth pulling on. There's also a compounding effect worth understanding here, because sleep and brain health influence each other in both directions. Poor sleep can make many of the other signs on this list feel more pronounced, from forgetfulness to brain fog to irritability, while those same struggles can, in turn, make restful sleep harder to come by. Breaking into that cycle at any point, whether through improved sleep habits, dietary changes, or both, tends to create benefits that ripple outward into other areas rather than staying isolated to sleep alone. Number 6, low mental energy and a sense of sluggish thinking. There's a difference between physical tiredness and the specific feeling of mental fatigue, where the body might feel perfectly capable of activity, but the mind feels like it's dragging. This sign often overlaps with brain fog, but it deserves its own mention because of how it typically presents. People describe needing more effort than usual to complete tasks that once felt automatic, like balancing a checkbook, following a recipe, or keeping up with a fast-moving conversation. The brain, quite literally, runs on fat for a significant portion of its energy needs, and DHA in particular has been studied for its role in supporting healthy neuronal function over time. This kind of mental sluggishness can be especially frustrating because it's invisible to everyone else. A person can look perfectly fine on the outside while feeling like they're operating at half capacity on the inside. That invisibility is part of why this sign so often goes unaddressed, since there's rarely an obvious external cue prompting someone to seek help. Patricia, a 69-year-old former nurse from Florida, put it in terms that resonated with many people she later shared her story with. She said it felt like she was always reading the instructions twice, not because she couldn't understand them, but because the first read-through never quite stuck the way it used to. She didn't feel sick and she didn't feel sad. She just felt slower, in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it themselves. Bringing that specific description to her doctor, rather than a vague complaint of not feeling like myself, turned out to be genuinely useful in guiding the conversation toward possible contributing factors, nutrition included. Number 7, dry skin, brittle nails, and other physical clues. Not every sign of low omega-3 status originates in the brain directly, but that doesn't mean it isn't connected to brain health. Omega-3 fatty acids support the health of cell membranes throughout the entire body, not just in neurons, and skin cells are particularly sensitive to shifts in fatty acid intake. Some people notice their skin becoming unusually dry or flaky, or their nails becoming more brittle than they remember. Around the same time, they notice cognitive changes like brain fog or forgetfulness. James, a 73-year-old retired postal worker, mentioned his dry, cracked hands to his dermatologist almost as an afterthought during an appointment about something else entirely. It was his dermatologist who asked a few additional questions about his diet and energy levels, eventually suggesting he speak with his primary doctor about his overall nutritional intake. What started as a skin concern opened the door to a much broader conversation about his brain health as he aged. It's a useful example of how these physical signs, while not dramatic on their own, can sometimes be the thread that leads to a more complete picture. This is also a good moment to point out why paying attention to the whole body, rather than treating the brain as an isolated system, tends to serve people well as they age. The same fatty acids that support neuron function are being used throughout the body simultaneously, in skin cells, in the retina, in the cardiovascular system, and more. When one area shows signs of insufficiency, it's often worth wondering whether other systems might be quietly affected too, even if those effects haven't become noticeable yet. Number 8, blurry vision or increased eye strains. This final sign surprises a lot of people, and it's the one we hinted at earlier, because DHA happens to be one of the most concentrated fatty acids found in the retina, the light-sensitive tissue at the back of the eye. The retina and the brain share a great deal of structural similarity, and some research has explored how omega-3 status may relate to visual clarity and eye comfort, particularly with prolonged screen use or reading. People experiencing this sign often describe needing to blink more frequently to refocus, noticing that text seems to blur after shorter periods of reading than it used to, or feeling unusual strain during activities that never used to bother their eyes. What makes this sign so notable is how rarely people connect eye strain to brain nutrition at all. Most would think first of screen time or simply needing new glasses, and those explanations are certainly worth ruling out first with an eye care professional. But for some, addressing overall omega-3 intake as part of a broader conversation with their doctor has been one piece of supporting better visual comfort over time, alongside standard eye care. Frank, an 70-year-old retired accountant, spent months assuming his blurry vision during evening reading was simply a sign he needed a new eyeglass prescription. His optometrist confirmed his prescription was still accurate and gently suggested he mention his overall diet and general health to his primary care doctor at his next visit. It turned out Frank's evenings, which used to close with reading, had gradually shifted toward a diet heavier in processed convenience foods since his wife had passed away 2 years earlier, a change he hadn't fully registered himself until he said it out loud to his doctor. His story is a gentle reminder that the smallest, most overlooked signs sometimes carry the most meaningful information, if we're willing to look a little closer and talk about them openly. Taken together, these 8 signs rarely appear as a single dramatic moment. More often, they build slowly, almost quietly, until someone looks back and realizes just how many small changes have accumulated. Margaret, whose story opened this video, eventually discussed her symptoms with her physician, who reviewed her diet, her blood work, and her overall health picture before suggesting some dietary adjustments as one part of a broader plan. She didn't experience an overnight transformation, and no responsible healthcare provider would promise one. What she did notice, over time and alongside guidance from her doctor, was a gradual return to feeling more like herself. It's worth pausing on that phrase, feeling more like herself, because so many of the people whose stories we've shared today used nearly identical language. Not cured, not fixed, but simply more like the person they remembered being before the fog, the fatigue, and the forgetfulness started creeping in. That distinction matters. Brain health as we age isn't usually about dramatic transformations. It's about paying attention to the quiet signals the body sends, taking them seriously rather than dismissing them, and working alongside a trusted healthcare provider to address the full picture, one piece at a time. It's also worth remembering that no single sign discussed today should be treated as a standalone diagnosis. Memory lapses, mood changes, fatigue, and even vision changes can all stem from a wide range of causes that have nothing to do with omega-3 intake at all, from thyroid conditions to medication side effects to other underlying health concerns entirely. That's precisely why these signs are best understood as prompts for conversation rather than conclusions in themselves. A healthcare provider who knows your full medical history is always going to be better positioned to interpret what these changes might mean for you specifically. If there's one number worth remembering from everything we've covered today, it's this. DHA can make up as much as 30% of the fatty acid content in the brain's gray matter, making it one of the most concentrated structural fats in the entire body. That single fact says a great deal about why this nutrient deserves attention, not as a cure-all, but as one meaningful piece of the broader puzzle of brain health as we age. None of these 8 signs on their own means anything is definitely wrong, and none of them should be used to self-diagnose a nutritional deficiency or any other condition. They are simply patterns worth noticing, worth mentioning to a healthcare professional, and worth exploring alongside a full picture of diet, sleep, stress, and overall well-being. If any of these signs sounded familiar today, we'd genuinely like to know which one resonated with you the most, and have you noticed it in someone you love? If you found this information helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today, whether that's a parent, a grandparent, or simply a friend who's been feeling a little foggier than usual lately. And if you'd like more videos like this one, breaking down the small signals our bodies send us long before anything becomes serious, we'd love to have you subscribe and join us for what's coming next.